The ship moved through the darkness like a ghost. No lights. No signals. Nothing that could give away its position to the thousands of alien sensors scanning the void around it. Commander Daniel Vance stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the massive warship that filled the main view screen. The alien vessel was 10 times larger than his own ship, covered in weapons that could turn a small moon into dust, and it had no idea he was watching. 14 months. That was how long the USS Resolute had been out here, hiding in the shadows of alien space. 14 months of watching, recording, and learning everything about the Corvani hegemony. The mission was simple in theory but nearly impossible in practice. Stay hidden, gather intelligence, return home with everything they learned. The Corvani were not a kind species. Daniel had seen enough in these 14 months to know that much. They were conquerors. They had built their empire on the bones of 17 different species, each one enslaved and broken. The Corvani did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who tried to stop them. Daniel turned to look at his crew. They were tired. 14 months in deep space, with no contact from home, had worn them down. But they were still sharp, still focused. They understood what was at stake. Lieutenant Kara Morrison sat at the tactical station, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced speed. She was young, barely 30. But she had the eyes of someone who had seen too much. Before joining the Resolute, she had served on the border patrols near Mars. She had fought pirates and smugglers, but nothing had prepared her for what they had witnessed out here. "Commander," she said quietly, "I'm picking up a new transmission from the Corvani flagship." Daniel walked over to her station. "Put it through." The alien language filled the bridge. It was harsh and grating, full of sharp sounds that hurt the ears, but the ship's computer had spent 14 months learning to translate it, and the words appeared on the screen in clear English. Daniel read them. Then he read them again. His blood went cold. "They know about Earth," he said. The bridge fell silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing and looked at their commander. Nicole Grant, the communications officer, was the first to speak. "That's not possible. We've been so careful. There's no way they could have found us." "They didn't find us," Daniel said. He pointed at the screen. "They found Earth. A scout ship discovered our system 3 years ago. They've been planning this ever since." The transmission was detailed. The Corvani High Dominion had officially declared humanity a harvestable resource. They were assembling a conquest fleet. 300 warships would depart within the month, bound for the small blue planet that humans called home. Scott Palmer, the chief engineer, stood up from his station. He was a big man with rough hands and a face that showed every one of his 50 years. 300 ships? Earth doesn't have anything that can fight 300 ships. Earth doesn't know they're coming, Kara said. Her voice was tight with anger. "We're the only ones who know." Daniel stared at the view screen. The Corvani warship hung there, massive and deadly, completely unaware that a human vessel was watching from the shadows. He thought about his family back on Earth, his sister and her children, his old friends from the academy. They were all going to die, and they would never see it coming. "How long until we can reach Earth?" he asked. Nicole checked her console. "At maximum speed, 8 months. But we'd have to drop the cloak to go that fast. The Corvani would see us within hours. And if we stay cloaked, 14 months. Maybe longer." Daniel closed his eyes. 14 months to get home. The Corvani fleet would arrive in less than 6. By the time the Resolute reached Earth, there might not be an Earth left to save. He opened his eyes and made a decision. It was not the smart decision. It was not the safe decision. But it was the only decision he could live with. "We're not going home," he said. Kara looked at him with confusion. "Sir? The Corvani don't know we're here. They don't know we've been watching them for over a year. They don't know that we've mapped their fleet movements, recorded their communications, and identified every weakness in their defense systems." Daniel turned to face his crew. "We have something they don't expect. We have knowledge, and we're going to use it." "What are you suggesting?" Scott asked. We follow them. We stay hidden and we follow their fleet all the way to Earth. We record everything. Every ship. Every weapon. Every tactic. And when the time is right, we send it all home. Nicole shook her head. Commander, if we get close enough to transmit to Earth, they'll detect us. We'll be destroyed. I know. The words hung in the air. Everyone understood what Daniel was saying. He was not planning a mission. He was planning a sacrifice. Kara stood up from her station. Her face was hard, but her eyes showed something else. Respect. I'm with you, Commander. One by one, the other officers nodded. Scott Palmer. Nicole Grant. Dr. Lisa Chen, the science officer, who had been quietly working at her station throughout the conversation. They all understood. They all agreed. Daniel looked at his crew. These men and women who had followed him into the unknown, and were now willing to follow him to their deaths. He felt a deep pride, mixed with a sorrow he could not express. The Corvani think we're animals, he said quietly. They think we're weak and primitive and easy to conquer. They've never fought a species that was willing to die for something greater than itself. They've never faced humans. He turned back to the view screen. The alien warship was moving now, joining a larger formation in the distance. More ships were arriving every hour. The conquest fleet was taking shape. Set a course to follow them, Daniel ordered. Maintain cloak. And start preparing a data package with everything we've collected. When the time comes, Earth is going to know exactly what's coming for them, and exactly how to stop it. The USS Resolute turned in the darkness and began to follow the enemy fleet. One small ship against an empire. One crew against 300 warships. The odds were impossible, but Daniel Vance had learned something in his 14 months of watching the Corvani. They were powerful. Yes, they were brutal, but they were also arrogant. They believed they could not be defeated because they had never been defeated. They did not prepare for failure because they could not imagine failure. That arrogance would be their downfall. Daniel was going to make sure of it. The stars stretched out before them, cold and silent. Somewhere out there, Earth was spinning peacefully, unaware of the storm that was coming. Daniel made a silent promise to everyone he had ever loved. He would give them a chance, even if it cost him everything. The Corvani fleet moved through space like a swarm of angry insects. 300 warships, each one bristling with weapons, each one carrying thousands of soldiers eager for conquest. They traveled in perfect formation, their commanders confident in their power. They had no reason to doubt themselves. They had never lost a war. Behind them, invisible and silent, the USS Resolute followed. Scott Palmer had not slept in 3 days. The cloaking system was never designed to run this long at full power. Every hour brought new problems. Power fluctuations. Heat buildup. Systems that wanted to fail. He worked through each crisis with steady hands and a tired mind, knowing that one mistake would reveal them to the enemy. How are we doing? Daniel asked, stepping into the engineering bay. Scott wiped sweat from his forehead. The cloak is holding, barely. I've had to reroute power from half the secondary systems just to keep it stable. Will it last? It'll last as long as I'm breathing. Scott managed a small smile. After that, no promises. Daniel put a hand on the engineer's shoulder. Get some rest when you can. We're going to need you sharp for what comes next. On the bridge, Nicole Grant was doing work that would have taken an entire intelligence department back on Earth. She had tapped into the Corvani communication network, intercepting thousands of transmissions every day. Most of it was routine, supply reports, navigation updates, boring military chatter. But sometimes she found gold. Commander, you need to hear this, she said, as Daniel returned to the bridge. She played the recording. It was the voice of Admiral Zorvax, commander of the Corvani Conquest Fleet. His tone was casual, almost bored, as he spoke to his officers about the upcoming invasion. The humans have achieved basic space travel, Zorvax said. They have colonized their moon and established small outposts on nearby planets. Primitive efforts. Their weapons are laughable. Their ships are slow and weak. The conquest should take no more than 3 days. We will process the useful ones and dispose of the rest. One of his officers asked a question. What if they resist? Zorvax laughed. It was an ugly sound. Let them resist. It will make the harvest more entertaining. These creatures have never faced a superior species. They do not understand their place in the natural order. We will teach them. Daniel listened with a cold expression. He had heard the Corvani speak about other species before. The words were always the same. Inferior. Primitive. Animals. They truly believed that the universe belonged to them, and everyone else existed only to serve. There's more, Nicole said. She pulled up another file on her screen. I found something in their historical database. Something about Earth. Dr. Lisa Chen joined them, her scientific curiosity overcoming her exhaustion. She had been working around the clock to decode Corvani data files. And what she had discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The Corvani have known about humans for almost a century, Lisa explained. A scout ship visited Earth during what we call World War II. The scout observed the conflict from orbit for several months. And? Daniel asked. Lisa's face was troubled. The scout was disturbed by what he saw. He wrote a report describing humans as excessively violent, wasteful, and dangerous. He recommended that the hegemony avoid Earth and wait for humanity to destroy itself. Kara looked up from her station. So, they knew we were violent, and they decided to invade anyway? No, that's the thing. Lisa pulled up another document. The scout's report was rejected. The High Dominion considered his recommendation cowardly and weak. They executed him for suggesting that any species could pose a threat to the hegemony. His report was erased from official records. Daniel absorbed this information. A Corvani scout had watched humanity tear itself apart in the bloodiest war in history. He had seen the bombs, the battles, the endless capacity for destruction, and he had been afraid, but his masters had killed him for that fear and buried his warning. They learned nothing, Daniel said quietly. They saw what we are capable of, and they learned nothing. They don't believe any species can challenge them, Nicole said. It's not arrogance, it's blindness. They've conquered so many worlds so easily that they can't imagine failure. The days passed slowly as the fleet continued toward Earth. The crew of the Resolute settled into a grim routine. Watch. Record. Survive. They monitored every transmission, mapped every ship, and cataloged every weapon. The data package they were building would give Earth everything it needed to fight back. If they could deliver it in time, Kara spent her off hours studying Corvani battle tactics. She watched recordings of their previous conquests, analyzing how they fought. What she saw gave her a strange kind of hope. They're predictable, she told Daniel one evening. They use the same formations, the same strategies, every time. They overwhelm their enemies with numbers and firepower. They've never had to adapt, because they've never needed to, Daniel said. Exactly. If someone hit them with something unexpected, something they couldn't predict, they wouldn't know how to respond. Kara leaned forward. They're powerful, but they're not smart. Not in the way that matters. Daniel thought about this. The Corvani had built an empire on brute force. They had never developed the tactical creativity that came from facing real challenges. They were like a fighter who had only ever beaten weaker opponents. When they finally met an equal, they would have no idea what to do. We need to make sure Earth understands this, Daniel said. Our fleet needs to know that the Corvani can be beaten. They just need to fight differently than anyone has ever fought them before. The fleet crossed into neutral space, passing through the territory of species who had submitted to the hegemony long ago. These conquered peoples watched from their stations and ships, afraid to interfere. They had seen what happened to those who defied the Corvani, but Nicole noticed something interesting. The Corvani communication channels were not as secure as they believed. Other species were listening too, slaves and servants, quietly passing information through hidden networks. The hegemony had enemies everywhere. They just didn't know it yet. "Commander," Nicole said one morning, "I've identified 17 separate resistance networks operating within Corvani space. They're small and scattered, but they exist." Daniel filed this information away. It might be useful later. If humanity survived, they might not have to fight alone. The weeks continued to pass. The fleet grew closer to Earth with each day. Daniel watched the countdown on his personal display, feeling the weight of every lost hour. His crew was exhausted but determined. They had given up everything for this mission. Their careers, their futures, probably their lives. One night, as the ship sailed silently through the void, Daniel found Lisa Chen alone in the observation lounge. She was staring out at the stars, her face pale in the dim light. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I keep thinking about everyone back home," she said. "My parents. My brother. They have no idea what's coming." Daniel sat down beside her. "That's why we're here. To give them a chance." Lisa turned to look at him. "Do you think it will be enough? Everything we've gathered, everything we've learned. Will it actually make a difference?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. It was a question he had asked himself many times. The honest answer was that he didn't know. The Corvani were powerful beyond anything humanity had ever faced. 300 warships against a planet that had never fought an interstellar war. But he had also seen something else in his 14 months of watching. The Corvani were strong, but they were not unbeatable. Their confidence was built on the weakness of their enemies, not on their own true strength. They had never been tested. "I think humans have survived worse odds," Daniel finally said. "We've faced extinction before. Ice ages, plagues, wars that nearly destroyed us. And we're still here. We adapt. We fight. We refuse to give up." He looked out at the stars. "The Corvani have never fought anything like us. And by the time they understand what that means, it will be too late." The Corvani fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a cold Tuesday morning. Not that anyone on Earth knew it. The massive armada gathered in the darkness beyond Neptune. 300 warships forming a wall of metal and death that stretched across thousands of kilometers. They were in no hurry. The prey was not going anywhere. Admiral Zorvax stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He was tall for a Corvani, with the gray-scaled skin and sharp teeth that marked his species. His uniform was covered in medals from 100 conquests. He had personally overseen the subjugation of 6 worlds. This would be his 7th. "Status report," he commanded. "All ships in position, Admiral. The human planet is defenseless. They have no detection systems that can reach this far. We estimate their primitive fleet is concentrated near the inner planets." Zorvax smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Excellent. Begin the broadcast." The transmission went out across the galaxy, carried on every frequency that the hegemony controlled. It was a declaration of conquest. A statement of absolute power meant to remind every species in the quadrant who their masters were. "Citizens of the hegemony," Zorvax announced. "Today marks another glorious expansion of our eternal empire. The species known as humans has been designated for harvest. Their world will be added to our territories. Their population will serve the Dominion. Any who resist will be eliminated. This is the natural order. This is the will of the hegemony." On conquered worlds across the galaxy, slaves and servants heard the message and felt a familiar despair. Another species would be broken. Another world would burn. Nothing ever changed. But on the bridge of a small ship hiding in the shadow of the Corvani fleet, Commander Daniel Vance heard the message and made his final decision. "Is the data package ready?" he asked. Nicole nodded. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. "Ready to transmit. Everything we've collected over 14 months, ship positions, weapon capabilities, defense codes, communication frequencies, all of it. And the transmission?" I've identified a gap in their communication grid. We'll have about 45 seconds before they trace our signal. That should be enough time to get the full package out. Daniel looked around the bridge at his crew. Kara Morrison at Tactical, her jaw set with determination. Scott Palmer at Engineering, still fighting to keep the ship running. Lisa Chen at Science, her eyes red from exhaustion but still sharp. Nicole Grant at Communications, ready to send the most important message in human history. They all knew what was about to happen. Once they transmitted, the cloak would drop. The Corvani would see them. And with 300 warships pointing their weapons at one small vessel, the outcome was certain. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. "All of you. What we're about to do will give our people a chance. That's more than most ever get." Kara spoke up. "Sir, if we're going to die anyway, I have a suggestion." "I'm listening. Don't just transmit. Decloak first. Let them see us. Let them know that a human ship has been watching them for over a year, and they never had a clue." Daniel considered this. It was reckless. It would cut their survival time from minutes to seconds. But there was something appealing about it. The Corvani were about to learn a lesson, and they deserved to see the face of their teacher. "Do it," he said. The USS Resolute rose from its hiding place and emerged into open space directly in front of the Corvani flagship. The cloaking field dropped away, and suddenly the small human vessel was visible on every sensor in the fleet. For a long moment, nothing happened. The Corvani were too surprised to react. A single ship had appeared out of nowhere, in the heart of their formation, and they had no idea where it came from. Admiral Zorvac stared at his view screen in disbelief. "What is this? Where did that ship come from?" "Unknown, Admiral. It simply appeared. No engine signature. No sensor contact. It was not there. And then it was." Zorvax leaned forward, studying the alien vessel. It was small and strange, with smooth lines and unfamiliar markings. The symbols on its hull meant nothing to him. "Open a communication channel. I want to speak to whoever commands that ship." On the bridge of the Resolute, Nicole reported the incoming signal. Daniel straightened his uniform and nodded. "Put him through." Admiral Zorvax appeared on the screen. He was everything Daniel expected. Arrogant. Powerful. Completely convinced of his own superiority. He looked at the human commander the way a predator looks at something small and weak. "Well," Zorvac said, "what do we have here? A tiny creature in a tiny ship. Come to watch the beginning of the end for its species. How amusing. Have you come to beg for mercy? I might be willing to grant you a quick death if you entertain me." Daniel's expression did not change. "I haven't come to beg for anything." "Then why are you here? Surely you don't think you can stop us? One ship against 300? Your species must be even more foolish than we believed." "I'm here to give you one chance," Daniel said calmly. "Turn your fleet around. Leave our system. Go back to your empire and forget you ever heard of humanity." The Corvani admiral laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound that echoed across the bridge. Around him, his officers joined in the laughter. The idea that a single human could threaten the mightiest fleet in the galaxy was the funniest thing they had ever heard. "One chance?" Zorvax repeated, still chuckling. "You are entertaining. I'll give you that. Tell me, little creature, why should I fear you?" Daniel waited for the laughter to fade. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and flat. 14 months ago, I watched your forces destroy a colony of the Velith people. I saw your soldiers drag civilians from their homes. I saw your ships burn their cities. I saw children running from the flames. You called it pest control. Do you remember?" The laughter stopped. Zorvax's expression darkened. "You watched? How? How?" "I watched everything. My ship has been following your fleet for over a year. We've been invisible to your sensors the entire time. We've recorded every transmission, every battle plan, every order you've given. We know the location of every military installation in your empire. We know the access codes to your defense grid. We know exactly how your ships fight, and exactly where they're vulnerable. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion had gone very quiet. Officers were checking their sensors, trying to understand how this was possible. Nothing showed any indication that the human ship had been there before it appeared. "You're bluffing," Zorvac said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. 37 minutes ago, Daniel continued, I transmitted everything we've collected to Earth. Right now, the leaders of my species are learning exactly what you plan to do to them, and they're learning exactly how to stop you. Zorvac's face twisted with rage. "Kill them. Destroy that ship now." The order went out, and 300 warships opened fire simultaneously. The space around the Resolute erupted in a storm of energy beams and missiles. The small human vessel should have been vaporized instantly, but it wasn't. The shields that the crew had been modifying for 14 months absorbed the first volley. Scott Palmer's makeshift improvements held together just long enough for Kara Morrison to return fire. Her targeting was perfect. The first shot hit the Eternal Dominion's engine assembly. The second disabled its primary weapons. The Resolute dove into the Corvani formation, too close for the larger ships to target without hitting each other. Kara fired again and again, each shot precise and deadly. A cruiser lost its shields. A destroyer's reactor went critical. 11 Corvani ships fell before the inevitable happened. A missile found its mark. The Resolute's shields failed. The hull breached on 3 decks. Fire spread through the corridors as the ship began to break apart. Daniel felt the deck shake beneath him. He saw sparks exploding from consoles around the bridge. He heard Nicole's voice, calm despite everything, confirming that the transmission had been received on Earth. "They got it, Commander. They got everything." Daniel smiled. It was enough. They had done what they came to do. The last thing he saw was the stars through the shattered view screen. Bright and beautiful, and eternal. His last thought was of Earth, of home, of everyone he had ever loved, and then there was only light. Admiral Patricia Cole was drinking her morning coffee when the transmission arrived. It came through every emergency channel simultaneously, overriding normal communications with a priority code that had never been used before. Within seconds, every military commander on Earth was watching the same recording. They saw the Corvani fleet. They saw the 300 warships. They saw Admiral Zorvac's declaration of conquest. His casual dismissal of humanity as a species fit only for slavery. And then they saw something else. They saw a single human ship appear out of nowhere. They saw Commander Daniel Vance face the alien admiral without fear. They heard his words, his warning, his promise, and they watched as the USS Resolute fought against impossible odds, taking 11 enemy ships with it before the end. When the recording finished, Patricia Cole set down her coffee cup. Her hand was steady. Her expression was calm. But inside, something had changed. Something hard and cold had settled in her chest. "How long until they reach Earth?" she asked. "At their current speed, 48 hours, her aide replied. 48 hours. 2 days to prepare for the largest battle in human history. 2 days to save their species from extinction. Cole stood up and walked to the window of her office. Outside, the sun was rising over the Atlantic Ocean. Ships moved in the harbor below. Cars drove on the streets. People went about their lives, unaware of what was coming. "Activate Protocol Omega," she said quietly. The word sent a shock through everyone in the room. Protocol Omega was humanity's most closely guarded secret. For decades, governments had denied its existence. Conspiracy theorists had speculated about hidden fleets and secret weapons. They had been dismissed as paranoid fools. They had been right. Deep beneath the surface of the moon, massive doors began to open for the first time. Ships emerged from caverns that had been carved in secret over 30 years. Not the small patrol vessels that humanity showed to the public, but real warships. Battle cruisers with experimental weapons. Carriers loaded with fighter craft. Destroyers built specifically for the war that everyone hoped would never come. Humanity had always suspected they were not alone in the universe. They had found evidence of other civilizations, traces of technology that could not have come from Earth, and they had prepared accordingly. 247 warships rose from their hiding places and formed into a fleet. It was smaller than the Corvani Armada. The ships were less tested, their crews less experienced. But they had something the enemy did not. They had the data from the Resolute. Cole studied the information that Daniel Vance had died to deliver. Ship schematics, weapon frequencies, shield harmonics, battle formations that the Corvani had used for centuries without modification. It was everything she needed. The Corvani are predictable, she told her commanders during the emergency briefing. They use overwhelming force because they've never needed anything else. They don't adapt. They don't improvise. They don't expect their enemies to fight back. She pulled up a tactical display showing the enemy formation. They will approach in a standard wedge pattern. Their flagship will be in the center, surrounded by their heaviest ships. They expect us to either surrender or form a defensive line that they can break through. So what do we do? General Marcus Webb asked. Cole smiled. It was not a warm expression. We do something they've never seen before. We attack. The human fleet moved out to meet the enemy at the edge of the solar system. They did not wait for the Corvani to come to them. They did not try to hide or run. They flew straight toward the alien armada with every weapon charged and ready. Admiral Zorvax watched the approaching ships with contempt. The humans had somehow assembled a larger force than expected, but they were still outnumbered and outgunned. Their attack was suicide. Pathetic, he muttered. They rushed to their deaths like animals running into a fire. Maintain formation. Let them break themselves against our shields. Cribe. But the human fleet did not behave like anything the Corvani had faced before. Instead of a direct charge, the human ships split into dozens of small groups. They scattered in seemingly random patterns, creating chaos in the orderly Corvani formation. The alien commanders tried to track individual targets, but the humans moved too fast and too unpredictably. Then the real attack began. Using the data from the Resolute, the human ships knew exactly where to aim. They targeted shield generators and engine cores. They exploited communication frequencies that the Corvani thought were secure. They hit weak points that the aliens did not know they had. The first Corvani cruiser exploded within minutes of the battle starting. Then another. Then 3 more. Zorvax stared at his display in shock. His fleet was being torn apart by an enemy that should have been helpless. How is this happening? These are primitive creatures. They should not be able to fight like this. Admiral, one of his officers reported. They seem to know our exact shield frequencies. They're bypassing our defenses entirely. That's impossible. But it was not impossible. Commander Daniel Vance had made it possible. Every shot fired by the human fleet was guided by the intelligence he had gathered. Every tactic was designed to counter the strategies he had observed. The Corvani were fighting an enemy that knew them better than they knew themselves. The battle raged for hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed. The darkness of space was lit by explosions and weapons fire. But slowly, surely, the tide was turning. The human ships fought with a ferocity that the Corvani had never encountered. When their ships were damaged, they kept fighting. When their weapons ran dry, they rammed enemy vessels. When they were outnumbered, they found ways to even the odds. Admiral Cole commanded her fleet from the bridge of the Defiant, humanity's flagship. She watched the battle unfold with cold precision, adjusting her tactics moment by moment. The Corvani were beginning to panic now. Their formation had collapsed. Their commanders were screaming contradictory orders. They had never been in this situation before. All ships, focus fire on the enemy flagship, Cole ordered. Take down Zorvax. The attack was coordinated perfectly. 100 human ships turned their weapons on the Eternal Dominion simultaneously. The massive vessel tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. Its shields failed. Its hull cracked. Fire erupted across every deck. On the bridge of the dying ship, Admiral Zorvax could not understand what had happened. He had commanded the mightiest fleet in the galaxy. He had conquered 6 worlds without defeat, and now he was watching his empire crumble around him. This is not possible, he whispered. They are only humans. Those were his last words. When the battle ended, the Corvani armada was shattered. Of 300 warships, only a handful remained intact. They floated in the darkness, their weapons silent, their crews too shocked to fight. Admiral Cole opened a communication channel to the survivors. Her face appeared on their screens, hard and unforgiving. "Run home," she said. "Tell your masters what happened here. Tell them that the primitive animals killed your admiral and destroyed your fleet. Tell them that Earth is not a world to be harvested." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Tell them we are coming for them." The surviving Corvani ships turned and fled. They ran toward the distant stars, carrying news of a defeat that would shake the foundations of the hegemony. Behind them, the human fleet regrouped around their wounded flagship. The cost had been high. 89 human ships had been destroyed. Thousands of brave men and women had given their lives. But humanity had survived. Admiral Cole looked out at the debris field that marked the site of the battle. Somewhere among the wreckage were the remains of the USS Resolute, destroyed days earlier in an act of sacrifice that had made this victory possible. "Commander Vance," she said quietly, "your mission is complete. Rest now. We'll take it from here." The stars were silent around her. But somewhere in that silence, she felt certain that Daniel Vance was watching, and she knew he would be proud. 6 months after the Battle of Saul, the Corvani hegemony ceased to exist. It did not fall because of human weapons or human soldiers. Humanity did not conquer the Corvani Empire. They simply showed the galaxy that the masters could bleed. News of the defeat spread like wildfire through Corvani space. The official channels tried to suppress it, but the truth was too big to hide. 300 warships had attacked a primitive world, and less than a dozen had returned. The great Admiral Zorvax was dead. The harvestable resources had proven to be something far more dangerous. On 17 conquered worlds, slaves who had lived in fear for generations heard the news and felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. The Velith were the first to rise. They were a gentle species, artists and philosophers who had been broken by Corvani brutality decades ago. But they remembered what it felt like to be free. They remembered their dead children and their burning cities. And they remembered that a human ship had watched their suffering and carried the memory to the stars. They struck at their Corvani overseers with weapons made from farm tools and stolen equipment. The uprising was bloody and chaotic. Thousands died in the first days. But the Velith did not stop. They could not stop. After so many years of submission, death was preferable to continued slavery. Admiral Patricia Cole received word of the Velith rebellion 3 weeks after the battle. She gathered her staff and made a decision that would shape the future of the galaxy. "Send them weapons," she ordered. "Send them intelligence. Send them everything they need to fight." "Admiral," one of her officers cautioned, "we barely survived our own battle. We don't have the resources to support an interstellar rebellion." Cole looked at him with cold eyes. Commander Vance spent 14 months watching the Corvani enslave and murder innocent people. He gave his life to stop them from doing the same to us. Do you think he would want us to sit here and do nothing while others fight for their freedom? No one argued after that. Human ships began appearing in Corvani space, always cloaked, always watching. They delivered weapons to resistance fighters. They transmitted tactical information to rebel leaders. They did exactly what the USS Resolute had done before them. The Corvani could not fight an enemy they could not see. Their patrols were ambushed by ships that appeared from nowhere. Their supply lines were cut by saboteurs with human-provided intelligence. Their governors were assassinated by rebels armed with human weapons. One by one, the conquered worlds threw off their chains. The Velith drove the Corvani from their homeworld in a battle that lasted 72 hours. The Threll, a warrior species that had been enslaved for generations, captured an entire Corvani battle group and turned the ships against their former masters. The Kesari, quiet technicians who had been forced to maintain Corvani weapons, sabotaged those same weapons at the critical moment of a major offensive. Through it all, humanity remained in the shadows. They did not claim credit. They did not demand payment. They simply provided what was needed and let the oppressed peoples fight for themselves. The high dominion of the Corvani fell on a warm summer day, 6 months after the invasion of Earth had failed. The rulers who had ordered the conquest of 17 species were dragged from their palaces by the very slaves they had considered property. Justice was not delivered by human hands. It was delivered by those who had suffered longest and lost the most. The Velith, the Threll, the Kasari. All the species that had been deemed inferior and treated as animals. The executions were not broadcast. They were not celebrated. The newly free peoples understood that revenge, however justified, was not something to take pride in. It was simply something that needed to be done. On Earth, a monument was built in the desert where the signal from the Resolute had first been received. It was a simple structure, a black stone pillar reaching toward the stars. The names of the crew were carved into its surface: Commander Daniel Vance, Lieutenant Kara Morrison, Chief Engineer Scott Palmer, Communications Officer Nicole Grant, Dr. Lisa Chen, and all the others who had served on that small ship in the darkness. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see the memorial. Species that had never heard of Earth before the war made pilgrimages to honor the crew that had started their liberation. They left offerings of flowers and stones and small tokens from their homeworlds. Admiral Patricia Cole attended the dedication ceremony. She stood before the monument and spoke words that would be remembered for centuries. "These people did not fight for glory," she said. "They did not fight for power or territory or revenge. They fought because they saw something wrong in the universe, and they could not look away. They fought because they believed that all thinking beings deserve freedom, regardless of what world they were born on or what species they belonged to." She paused, looking up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "The Corvani called us animals. They were not wrong. We are animals. We are territorial and aggressive and violent. We fight for our homes and our families with everything we have. That is what they failed to understand. That is the lesson they learned too late." The crowd was silent, listening. "But we are also more than that," Cole continued. "We are capable of compassion, of sacrifice, of standing beside strangers who need our help, even when it costs us dearly. The crew of the Resolute showed us that. They gave their lives not just for Earth, but for everyone who had ever suffered under Corvani rule." She turned to face the monument, her voice growing soft. "Rest now, my friends. The war is over. The slaves are free. The empire that would have harvested our world is dust. You paid the price so that others could live." A year later, a new saying had spread across the liberated worlds. It was spoken in trading posts and meeting halls, in schools where children learned about the war, in memorials where survivors gathered to remember. Never let a human watch you in silence. Because when they finally speak, empires fall. It became a proverb among the freed species, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. The small could defeat the great. The primitive could overcome the advanced. And those who seemed weak could prove to be the most dangerous enemies of all. The Corvani had conquered 17 worlds through strength and brutality. They had believed themselves invincible, eternal, the rightful rulers of the galaxy. They had dismissed humanity as insignificant, not worth considering, mere animals who had stumbled into space. Their arrogance had been their downfall. Their ignorance had been their death sentence. The universe was vast and full of wonders. There were species of infinite variety, with countless ways of living and thinking and being. But there was one truth that held constant across all the stars. Never underestimate the humans. They will watch. They will wait. They will remember everything you do. And when the time comes, they will make you pay. The stars belonged to those who earned them. Humanity had paid in blood, not just their own, but in the blood they had helped spill to ensure that no species would ever be harvested again. Commander Daniel Vance had started it all. With a single decision, in the darkness of space. He had chosen to bear witness. He had chosen to act. He had chosen to sacrifice everything for people he would never meet. That was the human way. That was why the galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere among the eternal stars, in whatever peace awaited those who had given everything, Daniel Vance finally rested. His mission was complete. His people were safe, and the universe had learned a lesson it would never forget. The price of ignorance was always paid in blood. The Corvani had simply learned that truth too late.